Hey Dirk, how are you?
Here we go. Simon, how you doing?
I'm very well, and you?
I'm very good. On a
Nice,
that's
nice
on
end of
a
the
on
week
a
for you?
on a Saturday morning, right? Is it still
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's interesting though because I think because it's Friday afternoon in the States, I tend to find I do a lot on Saturday mornings. I've got a call. I've got a call after this. Yeah, it's just one of those things that it sort of fits in. Otherwise, you're sort of working to a 4-day week, which doesn't really work. And to be fair, Dirk,
that's true.
when you have your own business, you sort of work all the time anyway. Like as much as I'd love to say I only work strict hours, I don't. But at the same time, the upside is when we were allowed to, obviously, not now, but when we were allowed to, I pretty much do all of the kids' activities. So,
Oh,
from
cool.
3:30 in the afternoon,
hmm
I have soccer or tennis or whatever it is. I'm flexible enough that I go and do
Uh,
that. So there's a good upside.
so I think now it's better. Yes, I see the benefits of I'm doing some consulting work, and you basically can pace yourself, but of course you have an ambition, right? So it's both ways.
Yeah, yeah. And look, it would be wrong to say that you don't work harder because I definitely work harder for myself, but it's actually enjoyable anyway. I don't mind. Like I
hmm
love what I do. So, the fact that you're doing a job that you love and you're working harder, it doesn't really bother me. As long as you've got the upside of, I holiday with the family all the time. So even if I'm if we go away, we might be away for 2 weeks and I'll probably work, 2 or 3 hours each day. And the kids just know when I'm working, don't bother me. But the upside is I get to actually have that time with the family and, unlimited holidays
True.
as opposed to, 4 weeks a year type stuff.
Yep. So true. So it goes always both ways. But I
Yeah,
think
it does. Exactly.
most important is you enjoy what you're doing, because
Totally.
then vacation has a way different meaning, right?
Yeah. And that's it.
Need
Like
to find.
you're spot on is I actually don't really, I don't have like Sunday evening blues where you're thinking I've got to go to work tomorrow
Mm,
because I love what I do. So,
mm,
I'd work 80 hours a week. It doesn't bother me at all. You just do what you've got to do. So the good thing is like, the thing that I love about it is I obviously it's my business, so I love it. But the guys that I've got working for me all love it as well. Like they find Treasury is a really good community. So none of them had Treasury experience before because it's so niche. But working in IT or healthcare or whatever it is they've come from, when I ask them, they're like, "No, I love this. Like Treasury folks are so easy to deal with compared to what I'm used to." And they get a real kick out of the fact that it's actually really enjoyable too.
it is a fun topic, highly specialized. I always think it's like tax, where you have your focus and you run your shop,
Yep,
right?
totally.
So that's pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I
Thanks
think
for your
like
mail.
the only other ones I can think of would be like, investor relations maybe, or procurement, I think is quite an interesting. My brother-in-law works in procurement.
Mm.
That to me is quite of an interesting topic as well. All of it's really any of the commercial finance stuff I think is quite interesting.
That's so true. All right. How
Very
you wanna
good.
play?
Okay, so let's get underway. Bear with me a second while I just draw up your questions. So I'll do all of the intro and everything at the end, Dirk. So I'll just say to you now, welcome to the program, and we'll go away.
And is it that you video call, or is it just a voice recording? What are you doing?
So for the podcast, I will just take the audio. We can leave the
Okay,
video on so we can see each other. I quite like seeing when
that's
we're
good.
chatting, but I won't use the video it's just the audio.
That's good. Fantastic. I just realized I have my musician's definition T-shirt on, which is
That's all
probably
right.
not quite like Treasury.
No, it's fine. Absolutely fine. It's just audio, so don't worry.
And even if I would stay that way, that's me.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I
Mm,
like. It's casual.
it is. All right.
Okay, let's do it then. Well, welcome to the program today, Dirk. It's great to have you on board.
Hey, how are you doing?
I'm really well, thank you. The question I always ask people to start with, Dirk, is how did you come to Treasury and what made you choose Treasury as your career?
Which is a very good question. So thinking back, and I'm probably talking a few decades back, starting in banking, and learning first things there, getting education there, doing university and the master degrees, which is a perfect prep for banking itself, but of course has so many similarities to treasury and corporate finance. So I think the the similarities are that big that it always has been very interesting to go in the industry side. Like I went with telecom, and the banking prep that I enjoyed was, I think, a perfect segue into corporate treasury. And the one thing that kind of I like most is you're really at the core of the strategy, at the core of a corporate, and you're kind of one of those functions that help a company perform, and you can at times, like now, be at the center of discussions, and at other times just to facilitate, and I enjoy that really much.
Absolutely. So just for listeners, you started your career back in Germany with Commerzbank. You moved to a controller role in Holland with Deutsche Telekom before moving into Treasury and the bond investor relations, also with Deutsche Telekom. You then left and moved to Otto, which is an internet business in Germany, for 3 years and set up their treasury. And then you returned to Deutsche Telekom, which by that stage was T-Mobile, where you've progressed through the treasury function to be the treasurer now based in Seattle. So my first question for you is, as a global citizen working in Germany, Holland, Japan, and the US, how did you find making those international moves? Was it easy? And what advice do you have for the listeners?
First of all, it was really my motivation to see other things, right? So growing up in a very kind of nice part of Germany and having being exposed to banking industry, universities there, was my ambition to see more. Very simple. So I studied abroad and then I worked abroad. What I liked about it is just accepting a challenge. And that's what I still like, right? When you start a journey, you don't necessarily know all consequences. You don't. But if you are aware that you will face some challenges, that you will find some rocks, just deal with it and be cool with it. That's what I always like. And the other element is, meeting people, connecting with people, which matters, in everyday's life, connecting with your family, but matters as well if you connect with actually bankers who are kind of human working at the bank. So connecting with people, I enjoy this very much because it goes back to very core principles of reliability, transparency, and the mantra of count on me, which is something that T-Mobile in the US certainly stands for, and the entire banking industry relies on as well.
I would imagine that there's some real cultural differences. Germany and Holland, I would imagine, sort of similar culturally, but Japan, hugely different culturally, and then the US, very different.
And this is so true, and you hit a very good point. So when I moved to Tokyo, I worked with a bank there. You go there with 2 suitcases. That's all you need for your business journey. And you get into a city where you rented an apartment, but Tokyo has no street names, right? So no street signs that you can rely on. And this is a challenge you already accepted. So deal with it and find your way and meet nice people. All of a sudden you realize you might not speak the same language. And I don't speak Japanese, but you find kind people that might be willing to help you. And that's the best way to learn. So just accept the challenge, be prepped, and deal with it. So I'm a big fan of leaving the comfort zone even today and doing something that we have not done or I'm not used to, and just face it and grow with it. I think that's very important for everyone in the corporate world, and treasury in the current world certainly has its challenges, and that's what I really like. Going to the US was similar, right? When I moved to the US some 7 years ago, my wife was pregnant with twins. So, right, we had no crib, no doctor to take care of. And 4 weeks after we arrived in the US, twins were born. So those things you can take on as a challenge. It worked fantastically well. Our kids are bilingual, that works well. But it's by no way it was clear or sure on how this all turns out, right? We just went for it and it worked out.
Dirk, that's of all the times to make the move, that's huge when you've got twins 4 weeks away from being born. That's amazing.
It has been quite a way, yes. And kudos to my wife who had to face it, because I was in the midst of an M&A, which job-wise, you have no mercy. You just need to deal with it.
No, it's deal related.
Fun times. And if someone is okay with accepting these vulnerabilities and just learning with everyday's challenges, I think that is a key milestone, and that defines working relationship and a corporate culture that someone would look at when in times of stress, especially when people like now are just sitting at their homes and you still need to perform.
I moved to Hong Kong and when my wife was pregnant, but I went and did it and left her at home, and then we went up after the baby was born. So full kudos. I know exactly what you went through there. My wife said, no, I need to stay at home for this one.
Wow. Yes. Always a big challenge, but I'm glad it is what it is now.
Dirk, T-Mobile has just merged with Sprint, and I read a great article that you wrote about the $19 billion bond posting deal that you just did from your couch. Tell us a little bit more.
Which has been a fantastic journey, I have to say. And when we did the bond pricing and went out, I thought, well, this is a story to share. So I did a LinkedIn article on that one. So we need to kind of look back to January, right? When the market was kind of at a very fantastic time, where we were about prepping for the merger, and I was looking at the market and fine tuning. All you do is then fine tuning your ideas and try to find the perfect structure for T-Mobile to merge with Sprint. Then you have March, and everyone has seen the volatility index, the Dow Jones, and all relevant indices, and nothing what we worked on was true anymore. It just was not valid anymore. Total different circumstances. We still had the ambition to merge. So as Treasury, all of a sudden you are the epicenter of things. People look at you, and there is no second division that could guide an entire process, multiple companies involved here. So you need to come up with solutions. And so we came. And the strategy then was very, very fine-tuned of what if. So you had several outcomes. And one of them was we might need to draw the M&A bridge that I had in place, 27 billion of bridge in place, committed by 16 very big and international diverse bank. These guys were informed we might draw on the bridge, was a very rare event, honestly, and a big challenge for the banks as well. And only after that, we drew the bridge on April 1 and April 2nd, we sold the notes. So we have been in the bridge only for a very few days. And what that provided is giving us more time, not being pressed into the market, because otherwise we would have had to issue something in the second half of March and look at the indices. It was the worst of all time. And once you lock in a spread on a coupon on a 5, 10, 30 years like we did, you pay forever. So the present value of what you decide and how you position your companies is tremendous. One can do the PV on the portfolio 19 billion of notes, and if you misprice by 100 bips, that's pretty easy to figure out. But I think what was core of having alternatives on guiding the company on how the landscape could look like. So preparing for the worst, but always have an answer, an option B. And we had always 3 options scheduled, making sure we have an answer to all circumstances. And one of those was drawing down a bridge, which took us, the liquidity aspect of the bridge was 23 billion. It took us 90 minutes with 16 banks to collect all liquidity, and obviously at the same minute you retire some debt, so it was not all put on balance sheet. Always in 90 minutes, a very smooth project. And while we did that, 5 minutes later, maybe 10 minutes later, we launched the IR meetings. So we went with the full board into meeting via phone, of course, all of our investors to prep an investment grade rated deal. All happened on one day. Usually at a corporate finance environment, you would basically spend a week prepping this and fine tuning all the processes. There was no way, given current environment, to do that. So with that was quite a ride. I'm really proud of my team. That was certainly not something that just one person would be able to do. And the trust of my board, the C-level, and the shareholders for us getting this done. And we did.
Is there any advice you'd give to the listeners out there about, I mean, you guys have worked from home for a while, haven't you? We talked about that before. So you had all of the processes and everything ready to go. Is there any advice you'd have for the listeners, though, about how you were able to do that remotely?
Yes, and I would really not look at the tech environment. I would not go with processes. I think the fundamental here is that you have a talent pool you can look at and you can rely on. Because in a project big like that, you cannot predefine every possible outcome. You need to be aware there will be surprises, and you need to have the transparency in your team to really get to the bone of it and say, well, here is a problem and we need to face it, and we have one day time to figure it out. I think that's core to it. Only then you will apply technology. Only then you can bank on your talent that you have in your crews, and only then you earn the trust of all boards and committees that look at you to perform.
What was Sorry, go on.
Please go on. Next to that, of course, on the tech side, we worked with the systems like Bloomberg, for example, to be able to share screens, have remote software, and then you run certain servers in order to really have always up-to-date data, right? But I think most important is that everyone understands the situation and has one common mission, making this merger happen and doing the best to its ability.
What was the most challenging part of the deal?
Frankly, understanding the market as they were mid-March and not knowing where this is going to go, right? In the aftermath now, as the indices bounce back, as the IG index kind of gained and improved by far what they lost in March. Now it looks always like something doable. We had a situation in March where you didn't know. You just could not predict anymore whether there was funds for new issues. Think about that. We were a new issuance in the investment grade community. Therefore, we are a new name. And we had a target of doing 19 billion funding. So all this didn't really suggest it's possible at any given day. The opposite is true. Most of March was closed. And as always, you need to have some very strong credits to reopen the market that happened, but at a very slow pace. We saw big volumes, which was not really a comforting factor because the big issuing volumes could suggest that the strong credits prep for times that might be way, way more difficult than we see today. So in the aftermath, it all looks like a doable thing. During March, we did not know. So we had other plans to really still close the merger, but being able to rely on the bridge for longer, which is not a very pleasant situation for the banks nor for this company as well. But it was a very valid and strong backstop.
What was the most enjoyable part of the deal?
I have to say, the trust that our board, C-level audit committee put in place, and I've been with this company, my team, most of my team have been with this company 5 to 7 years. The trust they put in place, and if you deliver difficult news, and I say really difficult news, because part of the message is the market is not there, which was never something you would expect in an M&A scenario. The trust of, okay, if you say so, I see your data, I see your logic. There are consequences we need to take on now. That was the, I would say, enjoyable part of the framework, understanding that we have been in a very difficult time, right? The other element, of course, once you do your funding and you see a certain strategy and tactic playing out, this is very pleasant once you see the order book, being north of 70 billion and with spread tightening, like I would love to design it and see it coming then. That, of course, is a very, very pleasant element of that very day.
And it's the sexy part of Treasury, right? Big bond deals like that.
Oh, yes, as always. This is a fun element if you interact with the market and the syndicates, and given the size, right, there was a lot of interest from the banks to be front and center to that one.
Absolutely. And Any advice to the listeners, you know, if they're going through a similar situation, like takeouts that you learned through the process?
First of all, I think I'm want to be careful on advice, because every merger will be different and every merger will have its unique set of opportunities and downsides. So one thing that paid off in our case was doing a very deep dive analysis. And I'm talking prior we signed the merger agreement. So this happened in 2017 and early 18. And prepping the team that there might be some news that we are not foreseeing was certainly a core element, right? There are always the unknowns in the air. So T-Mobile always has planned not to stretch the limits, to have some room wherever it is. And with that, you're prepared for the unknowns. And now we have COVID and we are prepared. I think that's very essential. On the other side, dealing with investors, the audit committee, and the banking community, I think one thing that paid off in T-Mobile is the transparency and the clear cut where we want to go. So no banker is in doubt what our mission is, and then we find some common ground or not, and both is fine.
And I mean, the good thing I think that's coming out of the COVID situation is the flexibility and work from home. But you guys have had that in place for many years before that, hadn't you? What's your advice to other treasurers around the work from home and flexibility?
There are a number of elements. I'm thankful you raised this. So we talked about the kind of people, the human factor in it, right? Then we talked about the technology you need to have in place. I think every treasury department right now has some other threats, because of course you have some people that try to, you know, game and play, go for fraud and do fraudulent activities, especially externals. So prepping the organization that this will increase, you have a merger and you and COVID might invite others to do so. And we have tremendous technology in place, rules in place. And it's going back to relying on technology and people and the interplay to prevent this from happening, which I think would, as a tendency, increase when you work from home. So I want to be very aware that every treasurer has this risk right now.
Definitely. Just going back to your earlier career, Dirk, you've worked across banking and you've worked across corporate treasury. How would you contrast the two? They're very different environments.
I think the benefits in banking is you see way more industries and you see way more situations, because you cover clients and you see those cycles and you see client going through cycles. The benefit I've seen on the industry side clearly has been that whatever you knew, you need to do it end to end. And the element from a kind of, you know, challenge a project and you disregard a project or you go for it and you convince the board that's the best option for the company to go for it, that has been quite a journey. And this at an industry level, of course, this goes with all the accounting aspects, the tax elements, the legal elements, and you do the compliance afterwards. That's what I find very interesting, that you really need to own your product and you need to make sure everyone in the company understands the background why you would do it. And frankly, some of those tools you would not apply just to be mindful of resources in a company. Although there might be a trade from a banker's perspective, that does not necessarily mean that an industry would or should engage into those things, because the back-end processes you need to put in place can be pretty burdensome. So the end-to-end aspect, the development aspect is the other one that I like very much. You can basically participate in a growing environment, you can support growth, and you can offer, design, and drive tools that make a difference. And that depends on the company risk appetite. T-Mobile is a very conservative positioned company in terms of planning and caution. But you can really be essential to any strategy within Treasury, and that's what I like very much.
And what about, I get the question a lot from bankers who are wanting to move to corporate treasury, and right now it's not an easy move to make. What advice would you have to those that are trying to position themselves to move out of banking and into corporate treasury?
I think there might always be a way, and it might be beneficial to industry to hire bankers that have a kind of broader perspective. So I would really focus on strengths of having seen other industries, having seen other products, and having seen other, cycles of companies. That's certainly an advantage, I would say. While going with the end-to-end concept I just described, there's a big learning curve for bankers to really kind of from the start to beginning participate, and you need to own it, right? If you run a company and if you help on the corporate finance side, you need to own whatever you start. And not all products kind of are well designed, so you might face some challenges. This is certainly something you need to be ready for. And then you have other elements that look at treasury as the supporting factor, which I'm not sure bankers are already prepped for, though this is certainly a learning curve. But I see bankers of being well positioned, really prepped, if they are ready to do the step, which probably is a multi-year learning curve and just not a short-term gig.
Yeah, and you need, I mean, as always, you need someone to give you the break, don't you? And generally speaking, I find people like yourself who have been in banking know the talent that they're getting, the caliber of that talent, and they're willing to give them the break to make that move. I always advise people, like, go to your clients and talk to your clients, because they know what you did on the other side, so they'll give you that break. And that makes it an easier transition, because there is a little bit to learn. It's a different job.
That's for sure. And I think both sides have their merits and benefits. And I find the industry very interesting. But I see, of course, the bankers having a very good kind of equipment and stuff as well. So I think you could play in both worlds if you want.
Yep, no, I totally agree. Outside of the exciting bond deal that you've just done, that we've just spoken about, what would you say have been your career highlights, Dirk?
That's one of the best questions, I think, because looking a few decades back, there have been so many instances. I personally always liked the challenging transactions where we helped the company. And right after the 2008, the banking crisis, I've been on a syndicated deal in retail. And I can tell doing, after everything collapses and you have the entire real estate bubble bursting, doing a retail syndicated loan there was most challenging. I enjoyed it quite much because you learn so much in the times of stress, and you still try to help a company, and you still need to make sure this fits within the strategy, because if a treasurer gets it wrong at some point of time, it can have tremendous consequences for the years to come, 2-3 years, and you would not have the strategic flexibility anymore, especially in a crisis. That's very burdensome. So doing this trade-off, that was certainly something that I thought was very, very interesting. But of course, not to kind of disregard what we did here at T-Mobile. Prior, we did the merger and getting this banking bridge to fruition, and being that as a really core part of the merger agreement, because without funding, you could not go into such a merger agreement. That has been a tremendous exercise where we got in 2018 a banking syndicate together that is probably very unique, and has served this company so well, not even from a financial perspective only, really from stability perspective only, because all of a sudden we had a crisis and we still could execute. So I've seen a number of challenges, but I wouldn't really point to one single one. It goes always back to have a special circumstance, to have a special market environment, and still finding a solution.
Yeah, and it's interesting because a lot of people do find that adverse times like the GFC, like what we're in now, they're challenging to go through, and they're not fun because you're doing long hours and it's really, challenging work. But when you look back in 2-3 years from now, it's probably the most fulfilling time in your career is that adversity.
And I couldn't agree more. I don't even recall whether it was long working hours or not. I would say it didn't matter, because if you really can play, and if you really can contribute, and if you go for success and you harvest some success, or all, depends on what's there. And if you position yourself in your company for some trade-offs, and you have to provide the transparency to those people who need to stand behind you, This is really the fun element of corporate finance for sure.
Definitely. And what's your advice to listeners around networking, and how have you approached it, Dirk?
I think it's always very important that you have people around you who trust you. And I think trust needs to be earned. And those people will move on like you will move on, and continuously staying in touch and regaining trust, I think, is so important. That goes with the inner circle, certainly a CFO, certainly some other relevant guys like a chief accounting officer, for example, the head of legal, always core and center to everything you do. But it goes to the audit committee as well, and not at last for sure, the investor community. So we do quite a bit of investor relations on the one side, and being out there, even during times where you might have not a lot of news or that might be difficult times, speaking to them, this has been always very critical, because once you go to market, it should not be a question of who is that and do I trust. It is really about networking and reaching out and defining your circles on who should be kind of in the know and who should get always your first advice. It's so critical. Looking at your team as well. Never forget the team, because that would not have worked just as a one-man show. And if the people knows what is essential, what's the strategy and the vision, what's at stake, that has been core and center to what we do and what we did at T-Mobile.
Absolutely. And what about mentors, Dirk? Have you had mentors throughout your career that have helped you through the tough situations?
Oh yes, and I had several mentors. And those mentors that I appreciated most were those ones very outspoken, very clear cut, that went to the point, in a second, and really had an interest of developing others. And most of my mentors are outside of my current network, which I think is very beneficial. So they would have always an outside view. I think it's so essential to have a very open and frank dialogue. Only that enables one to learn and do the next step and have this third party view of where you could improve and where you could reconsider what you're currently thinking. That's a very important element.
Dirk, if you could go back and give yourself some advice as a 25-year-old, what would you advise listeners out there of, the best thing that you wish you knew when you were starting your career?
With 25, that's very good data point, I think. Most of people will have concluded their education. They will have their first jobs. The one thing I see right now is hitting us, and that some of us have seen already, is the mantra, a crisis will come. Yeah. A crisis will mean several things. I finished my MBA when the dot-com bubble kind of was bursting and there was just nothing anymore on the job market. All of a sudden we had Enron and WorldCom. That's when I got in touch with auditors first time, and they were very concerned around the world around them after Arthur Andersen kind of collapsed. And 7 years later, you had Lehman and all the other institutions, and here we go again. And in between, we had some European debt crisis. Crisis will come, and you need to be prepared for that. And how do you prepare? I think it's first of all with continuous education, having a network, having something outside of work, because if you work intense hours like you just mentioned, you need to have a different mission as well. Just working is not enough, whatever it is. And having something you can look at in times of stress that kind of makes you rebalancing, be it family, be it sports, whatever, is very important. It's never just one thing alone, especially with 20-25. You might look at a certain career that is just one direction. I hope it's not, because you learn way more if you have ups and downs.
And I think that's a really good point, that there are crises, worldwide and, nationally within the economy. But I think there's also crises or hard times that happen in your own personal career. And it's not a bad thing. Everyone has them, and it's just a matter of when. And that's where you really learn the most about yourself. And again, if you look at a lot of people, they'll say that those bad times formed them for what they are today. And so don't look at these things as, the end of the world. It's just a speed hump, and you'll develop from that. I think that's really good advice, Dirk.
And I think it's so important because it will happen, and you cannot really control it. So you need to be prepared for whatever hits you.
Totally. When you're hiring, Dirk, what do you really look for in your direct hires?
So the one thing, of course, you look for a certain parameter on what's the education and what is the deep dive a certain person had done and what have been the successful projects. What I always try to understand in a conversation or multiple conversation is the flexibility that someone brings to the table, and the analytical skills which you have always a hard time testing, right? I would really not look at documents and grades. It's really the conversation that makes a difference, which then goes to reliability and transparency, because that's what I'm looking for in my team. So I'm really looking for and then compared to others, is if that very person an add-on to the team, would this person be something and add something different to the team, whatever it is. We believe a lot in diversity, and can we do something really to get more different perspective into that team? So multiple angles, always to get to something new, in order to prevent the same again. I'm really not a big fan of looking at someone who has 10 years experience in XY. I don't think that's the time really to look back that far. You would need to get someone who is able to understand a new software, understand roboting, the latest technology, if that's at stake. And you don't need to look at experience. You want to have someone who's sharp enough to get it.
So to some degree, it's more the soft skills that you're looking for then of the person, and how they work within your team, so that the sum of the whole is greater than the individual parts.
It's always the ambition, and we always work that it kind of will be a success that way, but of course there's no guarantee. But even in the existing team, asking for something off the charts, asking for something that we haven't discussed is always a good opportunity to work in the current team. And that could be a good segue for new people joining on bringing something new to the team that the team didn't know prior.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. What do you think makes a successful treasurer in the eyes of the CFO, the MD and the board?
I think there are a number of things. Of course, you need to have your technical capabilities, whatever it is, whatever tool needs to be discussed. I think there should be a very, very strategic focus on the treasury element that needs to be discussed and understood at CFO, CEO level. Whatever a treasurer does will have multiple year consequences. If you deploy too technical tools, you will have a tremendous FTE load or tech load to make sure you really understand and comply with all the agreements. And you need to always look for industry norms and opportunities to grow on the M&A front. All this needs to be enabled by the treasurer as well as part of the equation, right? You have other guys doing the same thing. And this goes then with transparency, reliability, integrity, I think, which is core, because eventually you're dealing with humans, you're dealing with people, and that's what a C-level looks at. Can I rely, and is that substantial data behind what I'm hearing?
Absolutely. And one last question for you, Dirk. How do you think the role of the treasurer is changing over the next few years, and specifically around technology changing so quickly? Do you think that will have a big impact?
It's changing now. The integrated role of treasury, process integration, right? Being fully integrated into any ERP system, it's core center what we do. If you look at risk management and how you buy insurance, understanding the systems you sit on, understanding the processes, we do a lot on process consulting internally, making sure we understand the risk and making sure they understand how the industry looks at it, because eventually we need to buy the insurance. And the treasury will be always be integrated and should be integrated with investor relations. So having a very investor focus to have a voice of the market within a company next to the CFO, next to the IR folks, to have someone who understands the market, because banks and creditors eventually want to see the company perform. That's certainly something that will be more and more important. And this current crisis teaches us a lesson.
I think it's teaching us a lot, isn't it? It's a fascinating time to be in. I have to say, I'm looking forward to the end of it, but I think we'll look back on it fondly.
So true.
Dirk, thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure chatting today. I look forward to working with you moving forward.
Thank you, Simon. Thanks for the time.
Hello and welcome to the Treasury Talent Podcast. I'm your host, Simon Lynch. Today I'm joined by Dirk Wehrse, who is the Treasurer of T-Mobile. The reason I wanted to get Dirk on today was he just released an article talking about the $19 billion bond deal that they just did from his couch, i.e. now during the coronavirus, everyone's working from home, and T-Mobile is going through a huge merger with Sprint. And on the back of that, that deal actually completed during the lockdown when everyone was working from home. So wanted to get Dirk on to chat about that and plenty of other things, but that was the great deal that I thought he'd done recently that everyone would be interested in. So I hope you enjoy today's chat with Dirk.